Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Introduction to English Literature course. We continue our journey discussing and examining the Renaissance and the Renaissance literary figures. Like I said before, we're done with Shakespeare, but at the same time, we are never done with Shakespeare because Shakespeare keeps showing up every now and then. Today, we move to speak about more dramatists in the Elizabethan age. But before I do that, there are three things I want to say. Number one, Shakespeare was a veteran. A veteran is a person who lives in two ages. He was a veteran not because he lived at the end of the 16th century and the beginning of the 17th century, but because he also lived at the time of Queen Elizabeth and also King James. So we have Elizabeth and King James I, who ruled England at the beginning of the 17th century. So Shakespeare was a veteran. He was both Elizabethan and Jacobean. James, Jacobean literature figure. Elizabethan literature that was written during the life of Queen Elizabeth. But sometimes Shakespeare is generally referred to as an Elizabethan figure, although he died, like more than 15 years later after her death. Okay? So a veteran is a person who lives in two eras, in two ages, during two reigns or whatever. The other thing I want to speak about before I begin is a very important term for the course and every course we're studying at the English department. It's called the English canon. A canon. And the English canon is a very important terminology we need to understand. Have you ever heard of the word canon?
Yes.
I
heard
camera, canon, okay.
Yes.
Interesting. Good to link things. The English canon refers to the most important literary work in English literature. The English canon, again, refers to the most important literary works, the most important literary figures, like Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, Marlowe, Milton, also novelists and playwrights, William Wordsworth, T.S. Eliot, Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy. The names that when we study English literature here in Gaza, for example, we study these names. When people in China study English literature, they also study Shakespeare and Marlowe and Jonson and Dickens and Hardy and T.S. Eliot. When people in Africa study English literature, in South America, and kind of everywhere, generally the most important literary figures and literary works are studied. So those people and these texts are called canonical texts. What is the canon again? It's the most important literary works and literary figures. The most anthologized. When you open any English literary anthology, you'll find Shakespeare. You'll find Wordsworth. You'll find T.S. Eliot. When you open any book about literature, you'll find these names there. So the English canon as a term is something we should know. But more important than this is how accurate, how good, how objective the canon is. Is it objective? Does it mean everyone in the English canon is a good writer who wrote well, and everyone who is not a canonical writer, canonical author, was kicked out of the canon because he wasn't good?
No.
Let's go back. Now, in the 20th century, many critics started to do some kind of revisiting, rereading the canon. People no longer take things for granted. It's like, okay, Shakespeare, but by the way, Shakespeare is always in the canon. He's the only author that is always in the canon. Okay? So he's the most canonical author. People who started studying and analyzing to understand the canon and what authors, what texts we have and why, they realized very interesting things. Number one, they realized that all or almost all authors are men. So which excludes?
Women.
Generally it excludes women. Two, almost all the authors are white Christians. It excludes non-Christians and excludes non-white people, people of color. And almost all the people in the canon are European. When it comes to England, and mostly they focus on people of London. What does it mean? It means the canon as a term
It's not fair.
is not fair. It's subjective, because sometimes if your writing is different, or if you don't write to please the mainstream, mainstream, the official people are not going to be happy with you or with your writing. So you will be kicked out of the canon. So that's number. We'll go back to the canon next week when we discuss John Donne. But again, the canon is the most important literary works of a particular era. When we speak about the English canon in literature, we speak about the big names, big texts. Hamlet, Macbeth, texts by other people, Othello, not only Shakespeare, but other poets, Jonson, Marlowe, Samuel Johnson, Dryden, Milton, T.S. Eliot, William Wordsworth, William Blake. These are always there listed as important figures. But do we have other figures who were excluded and kicked out?
Yes.
In this course, we will reveal some of these names. And we'll study them to understand why they were kicked out. And generally, it was because they didn't write things similar to the mainstream idea of what it is to write poetry. The second term is patronage. Sorry. Patronage. A patron is like a sponsor. You know what a sponsor is?
Yes.
Sponsor. Someone who gives you money.
Al-Mumawwil.
Exactly. Like someone who gives you money to study, gives you money to build your house, to start your project. So a rich man, a businessman, who gives you, a politician maybe, a donor who gives you money so you can start something. A patron or patronage is also another important term we need to understand if we just need to understand the classical, the Elizabethan literature before and after. Now, in literature, a patron is someone, generally a man, but sometimes could be a woman, who belongs to the high class, sometimes the royal family, and who has a lot of money, rich. What does this person do? He gives the poet money and provides the poet with protection. Remember, we're talking about the Elizabethan age, and even before. Chaucer, by the way, had a patron. He couldn't write poetry sometime because he didn't have someone to support him. Because if you don't have money, being a poet was not a job. Nobody would be buying you poetry. So you have to have a job. If you have a job, you don't have time to write poetry. So a patron, again, what's a patron? Someone, usually a man, a rich man with money. Sometimes the patrons, or usually they have a literary taste. So because they love poetry, they love literature, they take care of poets. So they give poets money in order to keep writing, to write more. And they also provide them with protection. Protection. If you say something that displeases someone, if you criticize someone, maybe someone wants to arrest you, to punish you for something. Oh, no. Don't. This man is protected by this patron. So some kind of political and social, and he would invite you to his court, his palace. And patronage played an amazing role in supporting. Remember we spoke about the printing press, how it encouraged mass production?
Yes.
Patronage also encouraged a lot of literary texts. Now, as a poet, you stay at home, you have enough money to live, and you can write as much poetry as you can, as possible. However, this patronage came with a tax, a sacrifice. If someone gives you money, supports you with money, you need to write good poetry about them, to praise them. If he brings a new cat, you'll be writing, "Oh cat, thou art, shall I compare thee to the best cats in the world? Or shall I compare thee to lions? You are more fearful and intimidating." If he buys a mobile phone, you'll be like, "Wow."
If you had enemies, you should write
So you need to write good poetry to praise them. So again, a patron is a person usually with a literary taste and a lot of money who provide poets with money and protection in exchange for praise, for good poetry sometimes. We'll speak about this later on. We'll mention this again and again, important terms. Now, let's go to Christopher Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe. Listen. Marlowe was a poet. In a way, he was contemporary to Shakespeare. He was a dramatist and a poet. We study him today as a dramatist. Later on, we'll come back to him. Many critics believe that Marlowe could have become more famous than Shakespeare. Not many, some critics. Could have surpassed Shakespeare. But the sad thing is that Marlowe died very young at the age of 32. And there is something mysterious about poets who die young. There are many English poets who die very young. And when they die very young, they have this kind of aura about them. They look like prophets, like people love them more, love their poetry more, and respect them more. Like, because you feel that they died because of their poetry. They died because they wanted. It's like, teachers who die young, they become like whoa. But sometimes they don't. They live forever, which is not good for some students, maybe. So, what I'm saying here is that the fact that Marlowe died young, at the age of 32, made him. He's a famous poet and dramatist. Many believe he was, during his lifetime, he was the most famous dramatist. The most famous dramatist. More than Shakespeare, because Shakespeare at that time was beginning to write, the good stuff we're studying. We just studied. He was starting. So, had he not died young, he would have surpassed Shakespeare, become more famous than Shakespeare, according to some views. Now, there are similarities and differences between him and Shakespeare. But before I go there, I'll tell you something, a very funny story about, not funny, but really interesting, about poets dying because of the poetry, and how patronage is really a fun thing, how it influences, because if you have a patron, there are usually competitors. Other poets want to take money, so they just write better poetry to your patron, and etc. I'll tell you this story about Abu Tammam in Arabic. You know Abu Tammam? Abu Tanabbi, Abu Tammam, famous poems. And I told you before, if you want to love English literature, you need to love Arabic literature, and vice versa. Start with the beautiful poetry, the beautiful stories about poets and authors and everything. Now Abu Tammam was praising one of the, that's Al-Mutanabbi. Abu Tammam was praising the Caliph sometime. And the other poets around kind of didn't want the Caliph to like Abu Tammam and his poetry. So he was like saying, praising again his patron, the Caliph, saying, إقدام عمر في سماحة حاتمي في جود أحنف في ذكاء إياسي. So the Caliph عنده إقدام عمر في سماحة حاتمي في جود أحنف في ذكاء إياسي, praising him, comparing him to famous Arab generous poets and people and fighters and everything. So one of the poets sitting around competing told the Caliph, إنما شبهك بأجلاف العرب. يا شيخ تشبيه. This is not good poetry. He's just likening you to ordinary Arab shepherds and Bedouins and desert people. And this was, Abu Tammam felt pressured here because someone is competing with him. So he just nodded something like this. He nodded like this and waited and remained silent for a short while. In Arabic, it's very famous in Arabic literature. It's called إيماءة أبو تمام أو إطراقة أبو تمام. دوروا عليها على Google. إطراقة أبو تمام, meaning when Abu Tammam reacted to this guy accusing him of not likening the Caliph to something worthy. So he nodded like this and he raised his head. And he said two of the most important lines of poetry in Arabic literature. He replied saying, لا تعجبوا ضربي له من دونه مثلا شرودا في الندى والباسي فالله قد ضرب الأقل لمثله مثلا من المشكاة والنبراس. You know what it means? لا تعجبوا ضربي له من دونه مثلا شرودا في الندى والباسي. You know, I gave an example. I likened him to things lower than him. فالله قد ضرب الأقل لمثله مثلا من المشكاة والنبراس. الله إيش قال عن نفسه عن نوره؟ الله نور السماوات مثل نوره كمشكاة. The mishkah is nothing compared to God's light. But God used this mishkah to make it clearer to this. So I was like, whoa. Now the guy telling the story, he said, I looked at the poem, the text, and I didn't find these lines. So he improvised them. You know, improvise?
Yes.
To say them without preparation, all of a sudden. Improvised them. فبعلق بيقول كأنه اقتد البتين من كبده. Like he cut a piece of his flesh.
You bring them
Like
best.
because the best of the best. It takes from your health, your life, your soul. It drains your life. And he adds وما لبث أبو تمام حتى مات بعدها. يعني كأنه Abu Tamam died because of these two lines of verse, because this is the best of the best he could have. And it's very beautiful here because, yes, people believe that poetry could kill poets. And that's why people love poets and respect them. Because we think they're just, you know, they're suffering for us, sacrificing their own lives for us. And it's very funny how the patron thing here is at play where poets are competing. So, Christopher Marlowe died young. He is different from Shakespeare in two main things. Number one, he went to university. Remember, Shakespeare didn't go to university.
Yes.
He went to a grammar school to study grammar, study rhetoric, study Greek drama, whatever. Now, this guy is described as a university wit. You know, wit. University wit. The people who went to university, either Oxford or Cambridge, are described as university wits. Shakespeare didn't go there. So he was more educated. He learned more about cultures, about tragedy, about literature, about language, about grammar. The other thing, generally, when we speak about Shakespeare, remember Shakespeare, we said usually he gives every character the appropriate language and appropriate reactions that would reflect, number one, his social class and his psychological status. Again, for Shakespeare, a king speaks like kings. A queen speaks like queens. A princess speaks like a princess. A prince speaks like a prince. A porter, a grave digger speaks like grave diggers. A messenger, an educated man speaks like the educated people. An illiterate person speaks like... So everyone has his language. And this is something that tells about the genius of Shakespeare. It's not easy. I know people who write short stories, and there is a kid 5 years old in the story, and the kid speaks like an educated person, a university graduate. Sometimes it's not realistic. Shakespeare gives a very, in a way, realistic image about the language and the... In Hamlet is a poet, right? A university student. So his language, his poetry is really interesting, beautiful. But when he is confused, when he is suffering psychologically, when he pretends to be mad, his language is influenced. It changes, deteriorates. Now, in Marlowe, everybody speaks a very highly poetic language. So Marlowe is different. Almost everybody, no matter whether you're suffering or not, whether you are a woman or a man, whether you are rich or poor, educated or uneducated, usually people speak very poetic language. So two differences between Shakespeare and Marlowe. Marlowe went to university, Shakespeare didn't. He only went to a grammar school. Shakespeare uses a language that fits the person's social and psychological status. Marlowe gives every character in his play a highly poetic language. Okay? Now, we study two important works by Marlowe. Number one is Dr. Faustus. Listen to me. I'll explain this in detail. Dr. Faustus. And as the name suggests, the main character is a doctor, and his name is Faustus. Dr. Faustus tells, it's a tragedy that tells the story of a scientist, a man of knowledge and learning, a man who almost knows everything. And I think it was possible then, 400 years ago, to know everything. I don't know. But because Dr. Faustus is a tragic hero, tragic hero, he has a tragic flaw. Tragic flaw, a weakness. He has some problem. Remember, Hamlet has too much hesitation. Othello, too much jealousy. Macbeth, too much ambition. Remember, we said that man wanted to achieve perfection, but man is not perfect. So this leads to his downfall. Now, Dr. Faustus had too much ambition and too much pride. Excess. Excessive? Excessive?
Yes.
Too much, a lot. It's good to be ambitious, but it's not good to be over-ambitious. Or to be ambitious like Dr. Faustus. So he knows everything, and now he wants to know more. He learns magic. And he manages to summon the devil, Satan.
Yes.
And he signs a contract. Remember the contract, the bond in Shylock, the Merchant of Venice? He signs a bond with the devil. He gets unlimited access to knowledge. Everywhere, every time, in the past, in the future. Anything. In exchange for what?
His soul.
His
soul.
Oh. So we have his soul in exchange for knowledge. Would you do that?
No.
Really? You wouldn't? This is not 1 day, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 24 years of unlimited access to knowledge.
Why do I
In exchange for...
if I don't have my soul?
No, 24 years later, you give your soul in exchange for this. So you pay later on.
You're gonna live. Yes.
So 24 years, and would you like that? Would you accept
I
that?
would do because I won't live as long as.
Yeah, that's possible. Or I know one of the other group once was saying, I would give my soul for a year of unlimited internet or unlimited electricity. Okay, it's funny, but again, priorities. This is 24 years, unlimited access, exposure to knowledge, and he lives a life of a person who can summon everybody, know everything, ask everybody about anything, goes back in time and in the future, and gets the knowledge he wants. And before he signs the bond, the angels and the people around him like, Faustus, don't do this. You're selling, again, listen, he's not selling himself, his life. Because if he sells his life, he's going to die later on. But he's selling his soul, the most important thing a man or a woman has. And now, in a blink of an eye, the 24 years just pass. And 1 hour before the clock strikes 12 for Satan to come, Satan, the devil, he regrets everything. He feels very remorseful. He wishes that he hadn't accepted the deal with Satan. But can he go back?
No.
It's too late. It's too late. Look at the extract here. This is an extract, page 35. Look here. This is Dr. Faustus. When the clock is ticking. O soul, be changed into little water drops and fall into the ocean, ne'er be found. Ugly hell, gape not, come not, Lucifer, I'll burn my books. Now, too late to burn your books. Faustus. Someone read this, please. Okay.
O soul, be changed into little water drops and fall into ocean.
Lucifer.
Lucifer. I will burn my books.
I'll burn my books. What? Yeah.
Also, be changed into little water drops, and fall into the ocean, ne'er be found. Ugly head, gape not, come not Lucifer, I'll burn my box.
Excellent reading. Yeah, please.
O soul, be changed into little water drops, and fall into the ocean, ne'er be found. Ugly hill, gape not, come not Lucifer, I'll burn my
I'll burn
books.
my book. And like we said last time, this doesn't perfectly rhyme here. So this is A, B, A, B, C, and D. No rhyme here, despite the S for plural. And this is something we described as blank
Blank
verse. Verse without rhyme. Now, irregular rhyme scheme is different.
It has rhythm, but it
What is he talking to, Marlowe? What is he talking to?
He's talking to his soul.
Oh,
saying
okay.
that-
He's talking to his soul. Can his soul talk back?
No.
What do you call this in poetry, in literature? No. I'm not sure whether he's alone or not. I'll have to check this. But when you talk to someone who doesn't hear or something that doesn't... Is a soul a human being? Can the soul talk back? Can it listen to you? So you give things the features of a human being. What is this?
Personification.
Oh, yes. Personification. From person, personify. What is a personification?
It's to give a thing.
Yeah, when you say, oh, fan, oh, mobile, my best mobile, you're talking to your best mobile. But here we don't only have a personification of the soul. He's talking directly to something that is not there here. Generally, this is also called in literature an apostrophe. You know apostrophe?
Yes.
When we say can't, this is an apostrophe. But in literature, when you call something that doesn't hear you, that is far away, or something that is not there, when you call for them, oh soul, this is called an apostrophe. An apostrophe always has a personification. When you say, oh fan, my lovely fan, can it talk back to you? It's called an apostrophe. An apostrophe. So he's talking to his soul, and he's also directing his speech to the hell. Ugly hell, gape not, come not, Lucifer. Don't open your mouth. Don't take me. Lucifer is the name of the devil, Satan. Don't come, Satan. Don't come, oh devil. Because
I want to burn my books.
I regret everything. I want to burn my box. I want to burn my box. But it's too late. And this is again, in a way it reflects something about that time, the society when people wanted to know everything. But many people wanted to know more than it is possible for a human being. So the theme here is excessive ambition. The tragic hero here has too much pride because he doesn't listen to anybody, and too much ambition because he wants to know everything. He breaks the barrier between what it means to be a human being and what it means to be, I don't know, an angel maybe, or a superhero.
What happens at the end? Does he die?
Yeah, of course. His soul is taken by the devil.
Why he believes that he is going to hell?
Because he breaks the norms. Because he signs a bond not with the angels, but with the devil. And the devil takes you only to hell. Lucifer is a name of the devil. Another text is by Christopher Marlowe is the Jew of Malta. The Jew of Malta. And as the name suggests, look at the name. What is interesting in the name? Oh, Jew. Interesting. Reminds us of what?
Shiloh.
Now, Marlowe wrote his text before Shakespeare wrote The Merchant of Venice. before. And it's true that Shakespeare was inspired by Marlowe. In many ways, the Jew of Malta has the character Barabbas. He's the first main Jewish character in English literature. And in this text, we have also the first main black servant, black character, Ithamore. Look at Ithamore, a black character, Barabbas's servant. Look at the interesting story of this play. It's a tragedy, of course. The story takes place in Malta. You know Malta? It's around near here. It tells the story of Malta, a place controlled and ruled by Christians. By Christians. Now, the Ottoman Empire, you know, the Muslims, the Turks, Turkey now, the Ottoman Empire sends a message to Malta, to the ruler, saying, give us money. If you don't, we will invade you and destroy you and kill you. And the ruler is like, oh, I can't defend. I don't have a strong army, but I have a plan. I'll collect the money from the Jewish people, the Jewish merchants, and give the money to the Turks. It's interesting how we have black people, Muslims, Jews, and Christians in a text 450 years ago. I don't want to describe this as a clash of civilizations, a clash of this. But we'll see how not only Jews, but also Muslims and black people are represented negatively. There is a lot of racism here. Barabbas is depicted in a really horrible way. A lot worse than Shylock. Because in Shylock, sometimes we feel sorry for him. We sympathize with him. But this is horrible depiction. That's why many Jewish people hate and dislike Marlowe. Accuse him of being anti-Semitic. And I think he is. But don't be happy about any racist person. Because the rule, once a racist, always a racist. He's racist against Jews, against Muslims, and against Africans and black people. So the story, in brief, goes like this. The money is taken from Barabbas and other merchants to be given to the Ottomans. And Barabbas feels angry and he wants to take revenge. He uses his daughter. And that's probably the worst thing I have ever said. Someone using his own daughter to take revenge. And because of his daughter, two people fall in love with her, and that's his plan, and they kill each other, they die. First, two people who die here. And his daughter Abigail discovers how horrible her father is, and like Jessica in The Merchant of Venice, she leaves her father, she converts to Christianity. And is that it? Is that all? Of course no. He swears to take revenge. To come after his daughter. She becomes a nun. You know, a nun, a woman who gives herself to God in a church. He uses Ithamore with his help. He poisons not only his daughter, but all the nuns in the church, and they all die, including his daughter. Is that all? We haven't started yet. Very long, very complicated story, interesting story. But remember in Shakespeare, in Shylock, we were like, he's good, he's not. Here, I feel sorry for him. With Ithamore, it's always evil, pure evil. So later on, when he is discovered, he's arrested in a way, but he again kills the people who arrested him. He causes the death of many people. And then he sends to the Ottomans who haven't yet received the money, tells them, listen, I'll help you occupy Malta. Conspires with them, they attack Malta, they occupy the whole island. And many people are killed. And they choose him to be the ruler. And then that's it? No. He conspires against other people, wants to kill more people, and causes the death of more, probably scores of people. I think hundreds of people die because of Barabbas. And at the end, he's discovered, they knew that he was behind most of these evil things, and he was put in a cauldron, a pot, and he was killed. Tragedy. Horrible tragedy. I'm not sure whether you would like to watch something like this or read something like this. It's very tragic, very dark. And there's a lot of racism, yes. I think, remember in Shakespeare, we asked, is Shakespeare a racist or was he exposing racism in his age? Many people say Shakespeare was as racist as any Elizabethan person. But here we have a lot of anti-Muslim, Islamophobia, anti-Jewish sentiment, anti-Semitism and racism against black people. Yeah, it's a matter of question, but I wouldn't generally describe Shakespeare as a racist.
No,
but he discusses racism. In my opinion, he's exposing racism in his community. But this one, we don't generally feel one tiny little bit of, of sorrow for this man. He's evil. A man who uses his daughter as a prostitute to kill people. A man who kills his own daughter, who poisons her. And notice the stereotype about Jews poisoning people and everything. That's Christopher Marlowe. We'll come back to Marlowe as a poet, okay? We'll just... Sorry?
Maybe because of that Hitler burned half of them.
So, why?
Maybe he read this tragedy.
No, Hitler is a racist person. He's a Nazi. He's a horrible person who hated not only Jews, but Muslims and black people and all people who were different. He was a white supremacist who believed only that Germans are the pure race. There's no justification for hurting anyone, let alone burning millions and millions of people.
I read that Hitler loved a Jewish girl, and
Many stories about Hitler are really fake in so many ways, but what he did is horrible. And as Palestinians, we hate Hitler.
yeah.
We shouldn't have any kind of sentiment. Remember, we detach ourselves from these racists, and at the same time, the Jews generally are not to blame for what's going on to us. We have the Zionist movement, Israel, many of them are Jews, and that's the problem, the occupation. The Holocaust does not justify the destruction of Palestine and the occupation of Palestine. And also the occupation does not mean we should be okay with people killing like Hitler and everything. But that's something else. Okay? So in brief, probably we can leave Ben Jonson for next class. Ben Jonson, very quickly, he was arrested at the beginning of his life, more than once. And maybe because he was critical of the monarchy, he was critical of some people, he went to prison. But clearly, later on, he realized that, okay, I know how to be close to probably the king or the queen, and he was friends in a way with King James. So he, like Shakespeare, he's a veteran. He was Elizabethan and Jacobean at the same time. He wrote several plays. Every man in his humor, every man out of his humor. And two more important works are Volpone and The Alchemist, like chemistry, Alchemist. I'm not going to tell you more about this because only we need to know the names here. But more important than this, and I'll stop here, is what is called the masque. The masque. And I'll conclude here.
Masque of Queen?
Remember the play, the globe, the stage, people would be standing and paying probably a penny, and people would be in the rows paying more money, rich people. Now the masque is also a play. But as a play, the masque, because King James loved the theater, so he wouldn't go out, he brought the theater and the people and everything inside. He's the king, right?
Yes.
And Jonson became a friend of him. He wrote several masques. A masque is a short play, written especially for the king and the royal family, performed on occasions only once. The king shouldn't, watch something twice. He's a king. So, short, written particularly for the king and the royal family, performed once. And generally, we don't have professional actors. The actors would be members of the noble families and the royal families. And this is the masque. Masque from masque.
Yeah.
Because when the actors were on the stage, it wasn't good for the royal and noble people to be actors. They would hide their faces or part of their faces. You would still recognize them, but it's still like they're being someone else. So the masque is different from the play. It's short. It's generally written for the royal family, about the royal family, performed once, and the actors are not professional actors, but from the noble and the royal families. An important text here is a play written by, again, Jonson. Written by Jonson. It's called The Masque of Queens. As the name suggests, masque. A play written by Jonson. Short, to be performed once, in the court, for the king and the royal family and the noble family. Now, we finished generally Ben Jonson. I'll stop here. For next class, we'll have, again, in brief, 2 more dramatists, but then we'll speak about a very important movement called the Puritans. And we'll see what happened to English drama and the theater. If you have a question, please do ask.
No question.
Marlowe, Shakespeare. Think of comparing and contrasting Shylock and Barabbas. Any question? Please.
If Shakespeare was a black person, wouldn't he be included to the patrons?
Here,
Canon.
the canon, the patronage. There weren't many black people then, but probably he will be ignored. Later on, we'll see how women were ignored from the canon, not because they don't write well, but because they are women. So the canon is not objective. For example, Afra Ben wrote a novel, a short novel, 50 years before the main character, the main novelist Daniel Defoe. But 50 years later, when a man wrote a prose text, the novel was like, whoa, this is something new. And Afra Ben was ignored. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next week, inshallah. Please.